Hey everyone, Sirturmund here again. And today we're gonna do something a little bit different. Instead of doing a gameplay video like we usually do, we're gonna do a tier list video for OP06 where we're gonna rank all the leaders in One Piece and kind of see where they fall within these 5 tiers that I put in here. Now, we did something like this back in OP04 and I had a lot of fun. So I kind of wanted to bring this back since I have time this week to do it. I'm off from work this week. So yeah, so that's what we're gonna do today. Before we start, as always, if you like our content, make sure to like the video below and subscribe to us. We post One Piece videos every single day. So anyway, let's jump right on it. No more fluff. So I kind of break it down into 5 tiers, right? Where I call S, which is meta defining. So these are your decks that are gonna just obviously define your meta. A are the decks that I expect to see at like top 32, top 16s of regionals and treasure cups. B, competitive decks that you can still bring to those tournaments, but you know you're gonna have a harder time getting to that top 32, top 16 placement. C, just decks that are fun locals. They're not the worst decks, but they're also not decks that you're probably gonna bring to like a big tournament. And then F is just strictly for fun decks that are so bad that I wouldn't recommend bringing you unless you just are really fan of that leader or a fan of that character and just want to have fun with it. So those are the 5 tiers that we're going to kind of drop everything into. Of course, since we are talking about OP06 and we just covered our showcase of OP06 leaders over the past month, I'm going to start with the OP06 leaders here, right? And kind of just rank them up and see where they end up. So let's start here from the betting bottom, which looks like it's going to actually, I guess we have Hody Jones and Uta here. Well, let's talk about it this way, right? Red Purple Uta, unfortunately, for Frontier. I showcased Uta, right? I showcased Uta recently. We tried to make a list that could potentially work. It's just too hard. I think the deck is just not good. Having to trash a card from your hand ends up being such a big disadvantage that I don't see this leader, unfortunately, making any splash anywhere. So unless you're just like a really big Uta fan, I wouldn't be playing this deck at all, which kind of sucks, right? But I mean, it is what it is. It's crazy how like just discarding a card or two can put you so far behind, right? And I just feel like he just doesn't have these big bombs that can just finish the game compared to other decks. So our first OP06 leader goes all the way in F tier for us. Then we're gonna go, the next one looks to be Hody Jones. And now Hody is interesting because I do think Hody has some potential, but I don't think that potential is here yet in OP06. So I think Hody goes to C. I think it's not as bad as Uta, but it's also a leader that you're going to have to work very hard to actually make him work. Especially with the errata, where now we have Hyosu is actually a merfolk and not a fishman. It means that you cannot cheat out that 4-cost Hyosu with your Icarus Munch, right? Which I think makes this deck a lot weaker than when we showcase it and we were playing under that errata without really knowing. So I think he can still pull out some crazy wins because he has some powerful cards. I think a lot of these new Fishman Pirates are very powerful, especially obviously the 7-cost Hody Jones. So I think that kind of carries to the C tier instead of just F. And then we go for Perona. And Perona is already right away, I think in my opinion, going to go into an event topper. So I think Perona is a very strong leader. Like being able to rest your opponent's 4-cost or lower character every single turn is so good. Is so good. Allows you to kind of clear the board, and then you can just, kind of set it up so that you drop your 10-cost Dolphy, and the opponent's going to have a bad time, right? I think a lot of really good Perona players will be able to top events with Perona, right? She might not be winning a lot of them, but she's going to be making it there to a lot of top 32s and top 16 if you know how to play her well. She can still struggle, kind of lose to herself if you don't get the right cards. So that's like the only reason that she's not good enough for S tier, but I think she's definitely up there in the A tier, right? So I think Perona is really cool. So far in OP06 leaders, we kind of see like a kind of cool spread here. So then we go for Yamato, and I think Yamato ends up in the same tier as Perona, where Yamato ends up being able to just put a ton of pressure, right? This double attack can be really nasty for a lot of decks to deal with, and can just blow people out, right? Especially like if you're going against something like Sakatsuki, for example, you might be able to sneak out a couple of double attacks and then set up for like a Hody Jones or something like that and just push a lot of damage. The really cool thing about Yamato as well is that there's like so many different ways to play her, right? You have the Sky Island package build where you're playing more like Gedatsus, you're playing more like the Satoris, right? The and the Holies. So kind of playing is kind of similar to a Nail. You have the Wano Country package where you can go for more Momonosukes, the Hioris, the Okikus, etc. and kind of relax for that. And then you have this new one that's like a fortress build where you kind of go full green and you have this ACOS kit. You won't know which Yamato build you're facing until your opponent starts playing cards, which can make it really difficult for you to know what you need to play around. So I do think she's going to be A. I think you're going to see a lot of Yamatos topping tournaments. But I think she can be a little bit inconsistent. So I don't expect it to be winning a ton of tournaments. At least not a lot of the big ones, right? Like she's probably going to sneak in a couple wins here and there. But obviously, we'll see where we go here in the S tier. Then we go to Reiju. And Reiju is an interesting one because I think she's also very good. I'm honestly down to put Reiju on A as well. And maybe this is a little bit high compared to how other people have Reiju. Maybe she's more like in between A and B, like competitive versus event toppers. But I think Reiju can just put a ton of pressure and that she can do really well against these other tier A decks. She might struggle against black, especially Sakasuki and Moria, because they can remove your board. But if you go against a Perona, if you go against a Yamato, I think you're able to kind of put enough pressure to just be able to get through their defenses at whatever they have, right? So it's like Reiju kind of shines more versus the more off, well, I wouldn't say off meta, because obviously Perona and Yamato are going to be very meta, especially Yamato. You're probably going to see Yamato like everywhere. I think she shines more against these decks that are at the A tier rather than the decks that are S tier. So she kind of thrives on beating these other A tier decks. So I think that's enough to put her at A tier. I'm very high on Reiju. Not high enough to say that she's going to be meta defining, of course, but I do think you're going to see her kind of topping in the hands of a good pilot. I think she's going to top a lot of events. Not only that, but the benefit of Reiju is that she's going to be pretty cheap to build. I don't expect a lot of people to be building Reiju, so it shouldn't be difficult for you to get the SRs that you need to be able to complete this deck. And then the last OP06 leader, I think we all know where Moria is going, right? Moria goes to S. Black is an absolutely crazy color right now in One Piece, right? So Moria, Sakasuki, and then we even have Perona here. And Moria is probably one of the best leaders to take advantage of this color, right? So we have the Absalon, we have the ACOS Moria, we can play Lucy and Rebecca in this deck. We still have the Great Eruption, because remember, in this meta for the West, so United States, Europe, South America, we still don't have Sakasuki and Great Eruption bans happening just yet, right? So we still gonna have Great Eruption for this deck to just put a lot of pressure into the opponent and just do the value that it needs to do. So I like putting Moria here in S tier. I think it's gonna be meta defining, and you're gonna have to think about how I'm gonna be Moria and how I'm gonna be Sakasuki. So this is the OP06 tier list. I guess like for the new leaders, right? Obviously, like I said, we're gonna go through every other leader, but I just wanted to first look at this here. I'm very high on the leaders for OP06. We have 4 new leaders that, in my opinion, are all very good. Very, very good. Obviously, there's no question about Moria, Perona, and Yamato being good, and I'm still very high on Reiju. We do have a couple stinkers here, right? Hody Jones and Uta are unfortunately not that great, but I think if you're looking to like get into One Piece, being able to get OP06 product will set you up in a good position, because right away you're getting access to some of these very strong leaders and their package to go along with it. Like really, you can build Reiju just with OP06. Most of the Reiju cards are in OP06, right? A lot, depending on the Yamato build that you go for, a lot of her cards, the Wano Country cards, are also going to be in OP06, right? So this is a same thing with Thriller Bark, right? Like you can build a lot of these decks almost 80% of the way with just getting OP06 boxes. So if you're looking to get into the game, this would be a good time to do it, because I think all of these leaders are going to be very powerful, not just now, but even going on to OP07. So that's my OP06 leader tier list from trying them out with the last month. We're going to go a little bit quicker through the rest of the leaders just to kind of put them into different positions and kind of what I think. I think Zoro still has the potential to be top in events. Zoro will always be this aggro boogeyman that can just put a lot of pressure. I think he has decent matchup still into like Sakasuki, even though Sakasuki now becomes a little bit of a worse matchup because now they have a 1-drop with Tashigi. but it still should be really good at being able to just put a lot of pressure. It should at least prevent them from being able to just drop the ACOS Moria, whatever they want. So I still think you can have a couple Soros sneaking in. Remember, we had a lot of Soros top cutting the nationals, right? We had like out of the top 64, we had quite a few Soros in there, and we even had a Soro that went to Worlds. Unfortunately, didn't make it to the top cut, but it's still, we had that deck show up there. So I think Soro definitely deserves to be A tier. Law, I think, goes a little bit more towards B tier. I think red green Law can still be competitive. The problem with Law compared to Soro is that Soro can just rely on the rush Soros and the rush Luffy and Diable Jambe to just kill the opponent. Law actually requires us to build a board, right? And the board can be removed by Absalom, can be removed by Lucy, so it's a little bit more difficult, can be removed by Perona and resting units. It's a little bit more difficult for Law to kind of keep a board and actually get it. You know what? The more that I think about it, I'm down to put Law as C. I don't even think he's good enough to be competitive currently. But if you're a Law fan, don't be scared. We got a lot of new tools in EVO1 for Law to actually start shining again. I just think that for now, it's too many things that kind of just prey on the Law player that I'm not comfortable putting Law anywhere above B. So I think Law goes right here. Red, green, Luffy, I think you just kind of play this for, you just play this for fun. I think obviously if you're going to play red and green, you probably just want to play Law. I don't think you're going to get a lot of this. Same thing with Odin, not a lot to talk about. Just not very powerful leaders here. Dofi is interesting because I think Dofi has some cool stuff, but similar to Law, Dofi gets better with the release of EVO1 and especially with OP07, right? We got a lot of new cards in OP07 that go into blue. For now, I think Dofi has to kind of stay at this C tier. I don't feel comfortable enough to go against a lot of these black decks because Dofi also relies on board presence, and right now we have a lot of ways to deal with the board removal. So Dofi kind of stays at the same tier here as Law. Same thing with blue-purple Kaido. I think I would put it right here as C tier. Same thing with the blue-purple Crocodile. So kind of like all these blue decks, I think kind of are good enough to be better than the F leaders, but not good enough for me to say like, oh, I'm gonna bring this to like a championship, right? And hope that I like do well, right? Like I think they're decent, but they can just be played around way too easily. King, unfortunately, is probably one of our worst leaders in the whole game, so King goes right away to F tier. Whitebeard is kind of similar to Zoro, but I actually think Whitebeard is a little bit weaker than Zoro. And this may be controversial. People might maybe put Zoro and Whitebeard in the same level, whether that's A tier or B tier. I think you can still be competitive with Whitebeard because you can do a lot of the same things that Zoro can do. But the problem is this, taking the life every single turn becomes riskier and riskier now that we have these big bodies that are dropping down, right? Like the ACOS Moria can drop down. If you go against a Perona, you're going to have to be playing around this 10-drop Doflamingo, right? Yamato can play like a Hody Jones to get rid of your blockers and then still be able to give 2 Dawn to that Hody Jones. So like, it doesn't do any favors to Whitebeard that you can just naturally go to 0 life or 1 life and kind of start playing from the back foot. I think a lot of these other leaders can be able to compete with this, right? Now, Whitebeard does have a decent matchup against Sakazuki because obviously the Setsuke attacks are hard for the Sakazuki player to defend. But you're really going to be relying on your leader because the Sakazuki player is going to be removing your board, anything that you develop. So I think I prefer the more rush approach of Zoro over just the Whitebeard more event-centered deck. So that's why I kind of put Whitebeard on B. I like Garp C tier. Red and black have a lot of good options that can make this leader actually shine, even against like the F tier leaders. Not enough to be competitive, but I think still good enough to be like, hey, I can bring it to a local and just have some fun. Kinemon, I think I'm going to put an F. And it sucks, right? Because Kinemon used to be so good on OP02. But I think Green just struggles. Green just struggles right now, right? Green is just struggling so much because of the board removal. I say that, and we have 2 green leaders up here. But I think Yamato and Perona have just really strong leader abilities that let you kind of play around that removal that opponents might have. Like, I think instead of Kinemon, if you wanted to play green, you probably want to play something like Uta, which we're going to discuss a little bit more later. I don't know. I don't feel like Kinemon can do as well in the current meta. Maybe he deserves to be on C though. Yeah, maybe we do Kinemon on C, just so that, because I think it is better than the other leaders. But I still don't think it's good enough to be competitive, and it's crazy how Kinami used to be everywhere back in OPO2. Sanji definitely goes to F, unfortunately. I don't believe in the Sanji supremacy just yet. It's just not good enough, right? Being able to summon these Manilas is not good enough in this current meta game. Ivankov, similar thing as like the Doflamingo. I like Ivankov as C tier. I think blue is gonna get a lot of new tools with OP07, but it's just not there currently with OP06. So I think Ivankov can just be here. You can still bring it to have fun at your locals and potentially win a locals tournament, but just not enough to get it to a bigger tournament. Magellan is interesting because I feel like purple is in an interesting spot because I think I don't know where to put Magellan, to be honest. Like, I feel like I'm in between B and C with Magellan. It's decent at like slowing down your opponent, and it can do really well against yellow decks. I'm actually gonna put Magellan at B. I feel like people tend to underrate Magellan. And yeah, I mean, purple hasn't gotten like a ton of new tools, right? Like all the new cards that we have from purple this set are gonna be going to Riju. But I think against certain opponents, Magellan can still just punish, right? Punish people, especially because of 4-cost Magellan, etc. Sorry, the 5-jar Magellan, just putting people down and down. So I like this. I like this Magellan here at B tier. I think you can steal some games. A good big build of Magellan can potentially do some cool stuff. So I like Magellan here. We'll put Zephyr at F. I don't have a lot. Oh, well, I think I like Zephyr at C. We did have some interesting Navy cards, right, that came out. And it is also still black. And anything with black, I feel, doesn't deserve to be on F. So I think you can put Zephyr as C, because you can literally just play Zephyr plus a bunch of random black cards, and I still have a deck that could definitely beat almost every other deck down here. So yeah, so we'll leave Zephyr as C. I think you can actually potentially do some fun stuff here. Smoker, same thing, kind of like C. So kind of the same level as your C over here. We go to tier C, so leave a locals if you want to have fun. Ace, I'm going to leave Ace at C. The way that I do it with these red leaders is that I think Sorry's on top, YBR second, and then Ace being on third kind of comes here. Like if I had to play a mono red leader, I would go down in this order. So I think that's the reason that we put Ace here on C tier instead of putting the same level as B. Can still put a lot of pressure, a lot of aggression, but I still think I'd rather play Zoro or YBR instead, depending on the meta. Kuro can stay on F. I don't really think Kuro is going to be making any splash. We haven't really gotten a lot of East Blue support. I mean, I guess we had a couple good cards that were East Blue, but I don't know. I feel like it's not enough, right? The leader ability doesn't have enough oomph for what I want this deck to be able to do This is going to be one that's going to be spicy. I'm very high on Arlong. And by high, I mean B tier, right? I think Arlong actually got a lot of tools, right? Because now you can mean, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like playing Yamato, right? But the thing with Arlong is that you're able to kind of summon this trigger cards, and we have a lot of new triggers from yellow, like Okiku, right? That you can now play in this Arlong package. You have the new 4-cost Arlong in green that you can also play here, that you can play out with your Arlong, because again, it's a trigger card, right? So there's a lot of new trigger cards that can actually make Arlong, in my opinion, pretty competitive, and can take people by surprise if you have never played against an Arlong. So I think he's actually very decent, a lot better than I've seen other people give credit for. So that's Arlong. Let's talk about Nami. Nami is an enigma, because I definitely think people are going to top events with Nami. So because we have this tier as an event topper, I think Nami will always be that deck that if you're not careful, can just sneak up on you and win the game and get to a top cut. We saw Namis in some of the national championships across the world. We didn't see any Namis at World, but I still think she has a lot of advantage to be able to just deck out opponents if you're not used to playing around the Nami, and if you're not careful. Now, it's a little bit harder now because you do have to defend against Yamato. So if you're going against a Yamato player, it's going to be kind of tough because that double attack is going to be really annoying. But we have a lot of events to be able to defend that. But I think we can definitely get to a position where Nami can just steal a lot of wins. So I think I like her here as A tier. I think a lot of Nami players, even though it doesn't get a lot of new tools, will still always be a threat that you gotta watch out for. Now, Iceberg automatically goes to F tier. I'm gonna start putting them to the left so that we can, because I think the leaders are starting to kind of bleed out to my camera here. So we'll have Iceberg at F. Not a lot of great tools here to make this leader useful, but there are a couple of interesting Iceberg leagues popping up in the East meta with the EVO1 and OP07. So, you know, maybe this leader can move up a tier in the next couple of sets, which is interesting. I don't think I ever seen anybody say Arlong actually can do anything, right? So, yeah. We'll put Lucy here at C tier. Again, black, busted color in One Piece right now. So anytime I see black, I want to put this here. Now, Lucci's a little bit different because obviously Lucci has to play more of the CP9 package, but I think there's still a lot of situations like this doesn't take as much advantage of the cost reduction cards from black, right? Because you kind of more having this restand with the Lucci instead. But that double attack can still be very powerful against a lot of this F tier decks. So again, I don't think it's competitive, but I think it's good enough to be like C tier. This Big Mom, I think is also good enough to be C tier. Black and yellow, so literally the two best colors. There's probably some decent lists out here that can take people by surprise, especially because you can still play the 10 cost Big Mom and get value from her that way. We obviously not going to play a lot of the black package, but with all the cards that we're getting, so like Okiku, etc., you can definitely build a certain deck here with this Linlin that can just rearrange the top of your life how you see fit to set up for these very impactful triggers that are in the game, right? Like Nami, Okiku, Nekomamushi, etc., etc. Katakuri is going to be our second one that I consider our S tier decks. There's no question to me here that this is an S tier deck. Katakuri becomes a lot better, right? We were just talking about it. You have Nami trigger, like the Onami trigger. You have the Okiku trigger. Okiku is such a ridiculous card. And I'm very high on Okiku and what Okiku can do and it's going to shape the meta. It's like a 4-of auto-including Katakuri, 4-of auto-including Yamato, 4-of auto-including Enel, and almost any other yellow deck that you might be looking to play into, right? So I think Katakuri has a lot of value here. Attacking for 7 here makes this leader very good into stuff like Sakatsuki. And then obviously the 10 cost Big Mom, if you get to play 2 or 3 of them in a game, you're pretty much almost always going to win the game, right? So this is meta defining. You have to play around how do I beat Katakuri. If your deck cannot, like, how do I say this, right? With these meta defining decks, you have to think of your list like, how many of these can I beat? If I lose to all 3, and I already spoiled how many of them are going to have in S, if I'm losing to all these S tier decks here, then you cannot play your deck. Like, you cannot play your deck. Like, all of these, I think, can take games out of the S tier decks, but a lot of these other decks here cannot. And that's why they end up being C and F tier, because they really cannot compete with a lot of this S tier defining decks. These ones that can do event tops is because some of them have good matchups into Katakuri, or some of them might have good matchups into Moria, or some of them might have good matchups into Sakatsuki, right? You have to have one way or the other and just hope that you avoid the other one that you lose to. And Katakuri ends up being like a 50-50 into Moria and into Sakatsuki, and because he can stand there with those cards, I think it deserves to be there. Let's skip ahead because obviously I already spoiled it and already been talking about it. But obviously the other S tier deck that we're gonna have here is gonna be Sakatsuki, right? So Sakatsuki is gonna be our other leader, and this really is where my S tier stands. And I don't think there's anything else. And even if you want to put in order, I would say that it's Sakatsuki first, Moria second, and Katakuri third as your top 3 decks of the meta. If your focus is entirely to just win events, you want to be playing one of these 3 decks, right? But you can get away with playing some of these decks here if you like also want to mix a little bit of fun in there or like a little bit of off-meta shenanigans. But if your focus is just I want to top as many events and potentially win as many events as possible, you're gonna play Sakatsuki, Moira, or Katakuri. And that's all there is to it. And Sakatsuki, again, is not banned yet in the West. It's not banned yet. So in OP06, this leader is by far the best because of the Mora and the Tashigi edition that we now have for this deck. So yeah, absolutely amazing deck here. That's your S tier. So we kind of have to rank the rest based on how they can do into the S tier and the A tier decks. BV, I think it's a little bit more for fun. And maybe it is a little bit low for BB. I think there might be some lists out there that can do really well with BB, especially because Rec can allow us to rush stuff. But just not being able to attack is just too much of a problem in my opinion. So yeah, I wouldn't put BB anywhere else. Doflamingo, I think... do I believe in the Doflamingo competitive? I don't hate it. Because, I mean, the thing with Doflamingo is that it still gets carried by 10 cost Dofi, which is kind of similar to Perona here. And honestly, the Punk Gibsons and the green events can still be very powerful. So yeah, in a long dragged out game, this Dofi can still take out games from any of these decks. The problem with Dofi is the same thing a lot of decks have, right? That you just get punished so hard against these other black decks, and you don't have a way compared to Perona to get rid of like the Borsalinos that this decks play, right? So not being able to just rest those Borsalinos kind of make this a little bit more difficult. So I think that's why Dofi kind of finds himself maybe towards the lower end of B tier. Definitely not A tier. But I also think he's better than a lot of the C tier decks. So I think I like him at B tier. I think this is a good place for it. Fujitora in the opposite side just goes for F. I know we talked about not putting a lot of black leaders in F tier. But Fujitora is so bad. I don't know, man. Like, I feel like Fujitora feels so bad. Okay, you know what? Let's leave it at C. Let's leave it at C. There are probably some cool things you can do. If you just go like Rebecca, Lucy, Moira, you can probably make this leader good enough to be able to compete against this F tier decks. So we can leave it at C, but I still don't believe in Fujitora, and I wouldn't recommend you playing this. Rebecca, unfortunately, gets to also go as C. Just not being, even though she does get access to Rebecca, Lucy, a lot of like cost reduction and removal with the Kyoros, not being able to attack is such a big deal, right? Not being able to attack is such a big deal. Your Luffy doesn't get to attack the leader twice, right? Because even if you get to play Luffy, you can only attack the opponent's characters, which I guess is good enough, but I don't think it's good enough to actually make his competitive. So I think I like Rebecca at C tier. It's just a little bit too slow in the current meta against these big bodies here. Like, you just get so punished by these black decks and yellow dropping their big moms on you. You're not putting enough pressure against any of these decks, which is what you want to do. You want to be able to put pressure into them, and you're not doing that with Rebecca. Queen, I like Queen at B. We get access to the new 9-cost Sanji, which can put the Queen into a really good position where you can just cheat out some additional big bodies that the opponent might not expect. So Queen still always has that advantage of being able to just stall out games long enough, especially against a good player. You have to be careful and really keep track of what Queen can do against you. You have to really know how to play around Queen. You get a lot of new tools with this deck. We had a lot of new tools in OP05, and we had some more from OP06 that I think still keeps this deck competitive enough for me to bring it to like some random tournament, right? Now, Crocodile, I think, is good enough for C tier. You get access to a lot of these yellow cards, right? So you get access to a lot of these yellow cards and yellow triggers. You can play your Yamato. But the big thing is that you can play that 8-cost Crocodile and be able to heal up, right? So you do end up having these triggers with yellow, which ends up being really, really nice, and it's really good. And this deck, in my opinion, gets even better with the release of EV01 and OP07. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get to put Crocodile on tier B next turn. It's kind of cool how this deck is getting better slowly over time. So I'd still like playing Crocodile. I think there's definitely a lot of wins that you can get there if the opponent's not prepared to deal with it. Sabo, unfortunately, also goes to C tier, right? And it's funny how like my C tier is comprised of all these black leaders, right? That I don't want to put on F, but I also don't think are good enough to be competitive. Because obviously, if you're gonna play black, you're probably gonna play Moria or Sakasuki almost 9 times out of 10. But if you want to play another one of the black decks, you do have a lot of options here that I think can do decent into a locals meta type of thing. So Sabo goes here. Sabo can be very cool, kind of protecting your units, and there's different builds that you can do with Sabo to kind of get value of it. So yeah, I mean, that's really all that it is with Sabo. Bello Betty is interesting because I think Bello Betty can take a lot of opponents by surprise. The problem with Bello Betty is that if the opponent knows how to play around Bello Betty, it falls flat, right? If they don't attack your leader, if they just kind of hold back and just take it slow, Bello Betty just falls flat on her face. And I think that's really not going to change here, unfortunately. So I see Bello Betty more like a C tier. You can surprise people in your locals with her, but she's not going to really win you a lot of events. So yeah, just have it there. Your Rocinante. Is Rocinante bad enough to go to F? Do we think that's true? There's no way, right? I feel like Rocinante needs to at least be C tier. Yeah, I feel like Rocinante is at least C tier. There's a lot of cool things you can do here, right? Defending your units. You can kind of play like a more defensive style of game plan, right? So I think I like my Rocinante as C tier. Not bad enough compared to, again, what we have here in F, but also not good enough to compete with the rest, right? Purple Luffy has been winning and topping a lot of events. And even though OP06 doesn't really help Purple Luffy a lot, I still expect Purple Luffy to be able to be there. I think there's a lot of really strong Purple Luffy players out there, and that's still something that you're always going to have to watch out for. This deck can be very aggressive with the Kaidos, etc. So I can still see a lot of Purple Luffy topping events here over the next couple of months until OP07. I think it is in a worse position now than it was before, but it's still in a good enough position that can still win events. It's a lot harder now to go against the A-Class Moira, but again, I think it's still better than a lot of these competitive B decks. Like, I feel like if I'm putting Magellan here, I'm definitely putting Luffy here because I think Luffy is better than Magellan, but I still think Magellan can potentially be competitive in the B tier. Enel also goes to A. Now, you might be thinking that Enel deserves S tier with Katakuri, but I think in this current meta of OP06, Enel is slightly weaker than Katakuri. So I like Katakuri at the bottom of S tier, and I like Enel at the top of A tier. So they are close, right? If I had to rank my top 4 leaders, it'll be Sakazuki, Moria, Katakuri, and then Enel 4th. I just don't think he's good enough to be S tier. I think Katakuri is better. So if I'm going to play yellow, I'd rather play Katakuri. I feel it might be a little bit more consistent. Now, Enel, they're going to be swapping. They're going to be swapping every set. Because I think in OP05, Enel was better. In OP06, I think Katakuri is better. But when OP07 comes in and we have that 10 drop ace, I think Enel goes right back on top on being better than Katakuri. So you can still play Enel if you have Enel and you prefer Enel over Katakuri. I think it's still, again, top 4 deck in the whole game. It's just that I think I prefer Katakuri slightly better in the current meta because it lets me rearrange a lot of these powerful triggers that we got in the game now with Nami and Kiku to just get a lot of value against the opponent, and also like a reject or anything like that I might want to put or rearrange anywhere in my deck. So Enel definitely goes up there. Phil Muta definitely F tier, no question about that. I actually think this blue Luffy is competitive. I think this blue Luffy can be underrated, this promo Luffy. I know blue is still missing a lot of tools, but if I had to pick any blue leader to play, aside from the dual color leaders like Queen and Reiju, I think Luffy will be my choice. Like, if I had to play a mono blue leader, Luffy will be my choice. I think this card can be pretty competitive. The value from the card draw can be really important. Now, of course, it still struggles because of the ball removal that we're going against. But, you know, being able to kind of go up in card value can be very important against a lot of different decks. So I like the Luffy here. I like the Luffy here in B tier. This red Luffy, I think... I think I like Luffy in B tier. And the only reason that Luffy's here is because Luffy is going to be kind of the same thing as playing Zoro. I think Luffy is a worse leader than Zoro. But you can pretty much build the deck the same way and still have access to be able to go Diable Jambe on your Luffy leader and be able to just push that last damage that you need. So you can literally build these 2 decks the same way. It's just a preference of whether you want to go for like the Zoro value or you want to go for like the Luffy value of being able to give this rested done. So I like the Luffy here, B tier, kind of similar. This red aggressive deck can put a lot of pressure into the opponent. I think Kid is going to go to C. Kid is nice, right? But I don't think Kid is good enough to kind of be considered competitive compared to these other decks out here. Crocodile, same thing. We're going to go to C. It's what we talked about with Ivankov and with the Blue Doflamingo. Crocodile, I think, is also another deck that's going to get pretty a lot better with OP07. So if you're a fan of that, just wait out a little bit longer. I think Kaido, unfortunately, I'm going to put Kaido on F. And maybe Kaido is better than a lot of these F tier leaders, but I just feel like Kaido's time has kind of not been kind to him, right? Like he was in OP01, like one of the kings of OP01, but it's just the ramping strategy just a little bit too slow, I feel. Like I'd rather just play some of the other dual coloriers that I find myself in C, right? I think people can nowadays correctly play around a 10-drop Kaido. So just ramping for this big bomb is no longer as much a threat as it used to be. Shanks also goes to F tier, and obviously Shanks probably, like you can't see it on my screen, but Shanks is like one of the worst leaders in the whole game. You shouldn't be playing Shanks. In fact, we're having a For Fun event this weekend with a bunch of the folks in my local scene, and it's like this deck roulette where we're all playing different off-meta leaders, and we literally banned Shanks because of how bad Shanks was. Like, we're playing all these leaders that you see here in C tier and F tier, but we literally said no Shanks because even playing Shanks felt like being such a disadvantage compared to every other leader. So, yeah. Sakatsuki, static deck Sakatsuki can go to C tier. Again, you have a lot of stuff that you can do with black now, especially with your A-Cost Moria, that can make this deck a little bit more competitive than the other decks. I like your Big Mom at C as well. I think it's a slightly worse than other yellow decks, but can still has the advantage of being able to play this 10-drop Big Mom and get value like that with her. Black Luffy can go to C, and I feel like C is like my catch-all for all these decks that I think are okay, but like just not good enough. So like Luffy and Yamato both go in there. So static deck 8 and 9. I think they're good enough to be better than the decks out here, but just not good enough to bring to like an official big tournament. Now, Red Purple Law, I like it as a B. There's a chance that this can deserve to be an A tier and top events, but I think Red Purple Law, you know what? I'm debating here between A and B. I'm going to put Purple Law on A tier. I think I like what this deck can do. We have some new tools that you can play with OP06, obviously, right? Including the Radius that now you can use to refill your hand. I like it. I think I like it. We also have, you know, like I think there's some tools that you got here. The Shuriaya blocker is really good for this deck as well. I think you can definitely steal a lot of games if people are not prepared to the aggression that you can put in with this Red Purple Law. So I think I like this at A tier and put the Purple Red Luffy at B tier. I think it's slightly weaker than what it was in OP05, so that's why we bring it to B tier now instead of A tier. But I think having a 6k leader can still be very powerful at just putting pressure into the opponent. It's just the 3 life that can be really annoying. But playing these big bumps can still be a big issue against a lot of opponents. So I do like this Luffy. So Law here, Luffy here, and Kid at C tier. So if you're talking about the starter deck, 10 leaders, that's how I would rank them. A, B, and C. The Kid is definitely the weakest one out of them, but I still think it has a lot of good tools that can compete with the rest of the decks. And we're down to just 2 leaders here. I think Uta is definitely competitive. I do think Uta, again, is slightly weaker in OP06 than what she was in OP05. But I still think that she can do a lot of pressure into a lot of the decks up here and can definitely take people by surprise if they're not expecting it. So I could see a couple Utas just sneaking in there, making it to like some nice deep runs on tournaments. But I don't know if it's good enough to win a tournament, but at least it's good enough to make some deep runs. And then finally, we have the Zoro and Sanji leader. And I think this is also going to stay in C. I think it is better than a lot of these leaders here. We have a lot of value that you can get from the Zoro Sanji and be able to restand and attack again. But it's not good enough to be at the level of any of these other decks up here. I feel like this is at the same level of like Cody Jones, which we also put here on this tier, right? So like Cody Jones and Sanji, when we talk about these new leaders coming out, kind of feel like the same way. Like they can hand roll some games, especially if you get the right thing with your Ivankov and your Seth, but you're not winning consistently. So that's it. That's my tier list here, honestly, right? So let's quickly get rid of my camera. So this is what I think, right? Again, S tier, pretty straightforward. We all know here where the S tier decks are. A tier, can be a little bit more debatable, but I think I'm really high on a lot of these OP06 leaders here, like this bunch over here. I'm still high on some of these OP05 leaders, and then some of these all good and trusted cards that we have seen do well in tournaments before. And then your competitive tier here, in the hands of good players, I think these decks can definitely top, but they are a lot more inconsistent compared to these decks that you see in A tier. And then everything else between C and F that you can just play at your locals, or if you just like the leader or like the character and want to see how that goes with that. So that's my opinion on OP06. You can use this, compare this list to what other folks have done, right? And then kind of compare and make your decisions on what you want to invest with in the future. Now, again, we know there's a ban on Sakazuki coming as early as EVO1 or OP07. We don't know yet, but it is coming. So unless you already have Sakazuki, unless you're already playing Sakazuki in OP05, I do not recommend you paying for this deck, right? If you already have Sakazuki, it shouldn't be difficult for you to get the 4 Gecko Morias and the 4 Tashigis that you need to upgrade this deck to OP06. But that's the only reason I would tell you to invest in Sakazuki. Even though it's the top deck in the format, use your money wisely. Unless you have a lot of money. If you have a lot of money to just throw away, sure, go ahead and build Sakazuki, right? But otherwise, do not build this deck. Instead, build Katakuri, build Enel. This deck should more or less be still strong in OP07. Enel and Katakuri, they will lose the reject, but the reject is less of a hit compared to like losing the Sakazuki leader and losing the Great Eruption, right? So you can build one of these, you can build Yamato, right? If you don't have this already, like all of these decks can be really good. Obviously, building Moria is also decent, but I'm scared that Moria with our Great Eruption is also going to be a lot weaker than people think. So I would recommend just focusing on yellow if you don't already have a lot of the black cards that you need for Sakazuki and Moria. If you already have them, then just focus on these 2 decks to build it. So yeah, I mean, that's it. That's what I'm looking forward to playing in OP06. I personally already have my Sakazuki deck built, and I pulled 2 Morias on my pre-releases. So I'm definitely just gonna go Sakazuki for OP06, right? But I also do have Katakuri pretty much 90% of the way built, except for the new OP06 cards. So maybe I'm gonna be switching between the 2. I am a meta slave, so forgive me about that. But anyway, I hope that you all enjoy this tier list video. Ended up being a lot more talking and longer than I expected. I tend to ramble a lot, so I'm sorry about that. But yeah, that's it. We're gonna have 3 more videos of gameplay coming out over the next 3 days. And then on Sunday, we're gonna do a bots opening video. So we got 1 bots here when I went to the pre-release in Mitsuya last week on the One Piece official store. I'm hoping I get another bots so that we can do a 2 bots opening video here on Sunday. So yeah, hope you look forward to that. If you like our content and you like what we do, make sure to like it below and subscribe to us. We post One Piece videos every single day. Enjoy your day, and I'll see you all tomorrow.